Hi, this is part 4 of the GUI buttons tutorial. The last section was about enhancing our class and this idea of splitting strings. So we accomplished that, and we can now add arguments into our class, our instance creations, so we can have various labels and pictures as well as set a different set of keys. Now in this tutorial, we're going to be finally getting down to making these GUI buttons OSC ready and sending a sort of a standard message out of our button that then could link up, and in this case we'll be working on a DSP effects rack. It can link up with our code in SuperCollider, or really any code or anything, any project you want to. You can just send these messages through OSC. And while we might not create the most universal unit, I'm going to try to have several different layers of arguments that get sent with it so that you can still sort by various things. Okay, so that's fairly abstract, but let's get into it and see what happens. So when are we sending messages? In our original button code, we were sending messages on when we press the mouse. We weren't sending messages on when we release the mouse. Messages when we press, but not when we release. Now we're going to try to send messages on all presses and releases, and we're going to create a standardized message. Okay, so the first thing we need to take care of is the OSC address. That is this play buff. So in this case, we're sending the play buff message to SuperCollider. So it will play one of the buffers, play a sample trigger. But if we want to use this for a number of different things, let's send a message that let's be able to put that into our arguments of the things we want to be able to send. Okay, so it'll be very similar to the things we did before. We're going to create a string, both a string in our constructor variables. We're going to create a string, and we'll call it OSC ADRS, like that. And then we'll create an array, a string array, and this will be OSCADR, like that. And then now we have to add it to our constructor. So we'll say string, OSCADRS for string, and we'll pass it through OSCADR equals A OSCADRS. And then down here below afterwards, we're going to have to split it up and change it into its string array. So we're going to say OSCADRS. We're going to say OSCADR equals split OSCADR S, and we're going to split that by the colon. All right, so now our OSC address thing is populated. And again, just like the labels and the whatever keys, etc., we won't have necessarily the same number of messages or addresses as we do buttons, or vice versa. So we're going to have to just make sure we account for that. So here in mouse pressed, we're going to send the OSC message, and we're going to send OSC message. So this if be on is sorting through for I, right? And we're going to send OSC ADRI. Except we're going to, in case we have fewer addresses than we do have buttons, then we're going to do modulo OSCADR.length. Okay, well, what if we have fewer buttons than we do OSC addresses? Well, that's okay, because then it will just use part of the list we give it. Okay, so that's one thing taken care of. And let's do the same thing here. Let's just copy that. And let's do the same thing here on key pressed. So instead of just the one OSC message, we can send an array of messages. So I think just for now, we'll just put some placeholders in. But I think some of them were called, for example, like we had amplify, something like that. These are for the effects processing. And we have something like multi-tap. Multi-tap, something like that. Okay. So basically this will repeat. Button 0 will be amplify 1, button 2 will be multi-tap, etc., etc., etc. Okay. This one we can make just one. We can make it play buff. So these set of buttons will always just do play buffer. Okay. If we run it just to make sure it works, you won't really see anything different. But if I open up SuperCollider, we can see the messages it's sending so far. Right, and I just have this. I think I already have it going. So we'll just say we can have one that says play buff. I think we have one that says amplify. And one that says multi-tap. Okay, so I'll just I'll change these names. T1, T2, and send those. And then if I press them and I look at my print there, I have amplified 0. Oh, that's not sending. Oh, it's multi-tap. Sorry, without the thing. Multi-tap 1, amplify 2, multi-tap 3, amplify 4. I guess it's because it's sending some other message. But we'll get into that anyways. Play buff. These are all sending play buffs. You see down here. Okay. In any case, that more or less works, and we'll take care of all the other stuff. So now let's see what other information we can give it. So now if we look at mouse pressed, it's sending the button number. And I think that's great. It can send the button number. That works well. So then we have, we can use that to sort if we want different buttons. Can be different items, different effects. It can just be a list. However, I think one enhancement we will need to make there is that not only do we want to send the button number, but in case we want to have an offset. So we want to start, instead of every bank starting again back at 0. So for example, let's say we have 2 banks, but we want to go through like 2 different lines of effects. We'll go ahead and do that. That in. We go up here and we create just a class variable, and we call it int. We'll call it bnum offset, maybe something like that. Okay. And actually, we're going to make it part of our. So I'm going to cut that part of our constructor. So I'll put those in with the constructor variables. Bnum offset. Okay. And let's add that to our constructor. So there's a lot of arguments, but we only do it once in setup when we create it, so it's fine. So int a, b, offset like that. And then we'll go bnum offset equals a, bnum offset like that. All right. And then we'll just add that to our OSC message. So when we're sending an OSC message, when we push the button on button mouse pressed, we're sending some kind of variable address. But we're also sending I, so whatever button number in that array of buttons it is, but we're going to add the bnum offset. Okay, bnum offset, and we'll do it here to key pressed as well. I plus bnum. So we can set a different sequence of numbers if we want. We don't have to send the same one. So if we go in here and change that, we have to add bnum offset. We'll just make that 0. But this one will make, say, 100 like that. If you run that and open up the Super Collider so we can see, if you press that, that's sending amplify 0. This should be whatever, multi-tap 1, amplify 2, that's button 3, 4, 5, 6, right? Now this one will be play buff 100 and play buff 101. You see? So that gives us just some extra latitude. I'm not thinking in particular of something right now to use it, but that gives us a few more things to sort through and buy. All right, now let's continue on with our OSC message and set it up properly. So another bit of information I'd like to add is the actual state of the button. All right. So if it's on, we're going to add a 0. If it's off, we're going to add a 1. Right. So when mouse pressed, we're going to go ahead and send the message 1 will be this, which button it is in the array, and then we're going to add msg1 dot add, and then we'll send its state. So if it's pressed, it'll be 1, and if it's released, it'll be 0. Okay, so this gives us opportunity now to add all of this here. So just our OSC message part from if beyond, just the OSC message and the 2 adds, into the released, because we're going to send a message on release as well. Okay. And we're going to make the 0 instead of 1. So when it's released, it sends a message, the address, it sends the whichever button it is in the array plus the offset, and then it sends a 0 for released and a 1 for pressed. So we know the state of the button itself. So we can do, I'm going to copy this here, and I'm going to put that into the key pressed as well. And I did, that's message 1, so that's okay, that lines up. And then I'm going to copy that and pop that into the message key released. Okay. And this will be 0 instead of 1. Okay. So there you go. We have a bunch of information now. We have the OSC address that we're giving it. We have a button number and an offset, and then we have a 0 or a 1 for on-off. Okay, and so I'm going to add a couple other bits of information that might be helpful, may or may not be helpful. So what I'd like to do now is for each of our instances, for each instance, so this is an instance of push me is not a single button, but like an array of buttons, right? It's a row or a column of buttons, and we decide how many there are. What I'd like to do then is add for each of those instances, I'd like to give an index number so we can send a message saying what block of buttons or what array of buttons it belongs to. So we'll have an int at the very top, and we'll call it ix. Okay. And then we'll add to our constructor here. We'll say int at the very front, aix. And here we'll pop into our, we'll pass it through. So ix equals aix. Right. All right. And so then we're going to add that index number to our message here. So, right. And we'll put it at the top. So we're going to add, the first thing we're going to send is what bank it is. Then we'll send what button in the bank it is. And then we'll say whether the state of that button, whether it's on or off. So msg1.add ix. Okay. And we'll have to add it to all bits of it. So I'll just copy that. And to mouse released as well. And to key pressed. And to key released as well. Okay, so we're sending the index number now. Now we have to update this bit. So push me will be, the buttons will be 0 index, and buttons 2 will be index 1. Okay, so if we run that, we'll see our information here in Super Collider building up. We're going to get a press now on press and release, we get its bank 0, its button 0, and its state was 1 when I pushed it and 0 when I released it. If we go here, it's play buff 1. That's the index number of the whole row. It's 101, so it's a second button plus the offset of 100. And its state is 1. If I release its state is 0. Okay? And let me just change the number of buttons here to 12 again, so we can have a little bit more variation there. Great. Now I want to do two more things. One is I'm going to pass one more bit of information that might be quite helpful through the OSC message. And then we're going to give it another option to the type of button it is. So we can make it momentary, where it presses on and then releases off, or we can make it a toggle, okay, where you press it every time and you change its state. Okay. And so what we'll do is, first of all, I'd like to pass also the labels through. All right. So what we'll do is we will see we already have the labels there. So we just add it to our OSC message. So if we go into mouse pressed, so let's create kind of a artificial hierarchy. We're going to have the index number, that's the bank it belongs to, that's good. The button it is, and its state. But maybe before the state, we're going to set the label. So MSG1, 1.add, and it will be LBL I, okay? And that'll be 1 for every button. So if there's too many labels than there are buttons, there's more labels than there are buttons, that's fine. We just won't get to all the labels. If there are more buttons than labels, we're going to have to modulo that, just like we did with the labels for the draw. So the modulo that LBL.length, like that. Okay? So I'm going to copy that line. So we're going to send the label as well, and I'm going to do it for each of these. Before the state, we're going to put the label before the state. Right? And there. Okay. So if I run that, again, look at SuperCloud to see what messages are actually coming in. We'll press this one's. Oops. So, oh, right. It doesn't have any labels. Again, we'll have to follow pretty much identical to what we do in draw. So if a label G, that's right, is on. So we'll have to add that. I forgot about that. And we'll just paste that in front of each of the labels. So it'll only add this message if that label gate is on, right? So now, obviously these ones don't have any labels, so it's not going to produce any kind of, it's not going to add that bit of data, right? But here, it sends, so that one is amplify 0, 0 hi-hat 1, and then 0 hi-hat 2, and then that sends that label kick through as well. That sends snare through. Button number 5, sending snare, bank number 0, and its state. Okay, great. So that's a lot of information from one little button. And you can use that variably in your effects or anything you want to control. And you don't have to take every bit of information. You can just take the ones you want. So, if I just want the label, I'll grab message 0, 1, 2, 3. It'll be MSG square bracket 3. It'll be MSG 3. And then I'll just use that bit of information. Okay, so it's up to the receiver to do what they want with the information you're sending. Now the final thing I want to do here, which actually is the slightly more involved than what we've been doing, is I want to create a toggle option. Okay, so just like we did, similar into the way we did this horizontal vertical option to draw it either as a horizontal row or a vertical column, we're going to have an option to make the buttons either. And I mean, I suppose if you really want to get into it, I think it's a level of complexity that we don't want to deal with right now. But I suppose you can have an array of toggles and say every individual button is a toggle or a momentary. But let's not do that. Let's just have the whole bank be either all momentaries or all toggle buttons. Okay, and then I suppose if you want, like a row of where it changes with each button, you can just create a separate instance of the class with just one button in it or two buttons in it. Okay. So let's do that. Let's create another constructor variable. So our constructor variables are becoming very long, and sometimes it's a good thing, sometimes it's a bad thing. Here it seems like there's a lot of different bits that it would be good for us to control and do it. And like I said, you can have multiple constructors. I won't show you in this video or in this series of tutorials. But for example, you can make a generic constructor where you just decide all these things ahead of time for the user, and you just have a location. You have just a few variables like you can decide everything. Just have its location. Okay. Well, in any case, we're going to add one here, and we're going to make it an int, and we're going to call it. We have a button mode, I guess, or we'll call it B state, something like that. Well, the state is already so B mode. Call it that B mode, okay? And then we'll pass it through our constructor. So we'll have an int a B mode. And then pass it through B mode equals a B mode. Okay. Now we're going to go down to our actions, our OSC bits. Give an extra line here. So if a mouse is pressed and happens to be on one of these buttons, it sends its message, and then it updates the trigger. Right to 1. In other words, it changes its color, and then this btrig 0 turns it off, right? Okay, so that's kind of the same thing we want to do, this 1 and 0. So we might have been able to use btrig, but it's fine. We'll use this new variable. I'm not sure we would have been able to. So this is what happens when it's momentary, right? So we'll call that the 0 state. So we'll say if b mode equals 0, which will be the momentary state, that will happen. Okay? That's what happens when it's a momentary type of button. Okay? And then, what we can do is we can make it, I don't want to get too crazy here. Because then there's no feedback, but it's fine. We'll add this functionality in. Okay, so for example, we'll do an if here after, and you can use else if, or you can use just plain if. I don't see any reason why to use if or else if, because if it's not 0, anyways, let's just use another if, just to keep things simple. Okay, so if b mode equals, no, actually, you know what we'll do? We'll just use a plain else. Sorry, changing my mind here in midstream. We'll use an else, but we'll pass b mode through. So I'll show you what I mean. So let's do else. So if it's not 0, this is what happens. Everything in these brackets, right? It's not 0. If b mode is not 0, so it's 1 or greater, or anything else, then -1, I suppose, then it's going to do this. So I'm going to copy all of this stuff. Okay. And then actually going to do the toggle thing, which we've done several times before, so this should be somewhat familiar if you've seen the other videos. What we're going to do is we're going to increment. All right, so we need a toggle, actually. Well, there you go. We just the trig. Well, we can use the trig. That's what we're going to do. We're going to use the trig. Okay, so we'll say, and remember, this is all still in a big for loop for the number of buttons. Okay. So what we'll do is we'll say we'll toggle through the button trigger. All right. So we'll say trig I equals itself I plus, and then we'll use the B mode number so we can toggle between more than two states. So we'll say B mode plus 1. Okay. No, sorry, plus 1. Sorry about that. Okay. And I'll back up and try to clarify this to you. So we're going to do B trigger. We're going to update B trigger, right? So if it's 0, we're going to add 1 to it. It's going to become 1. If it's 1, it's going to add 2 every time we push the button. Okay. And what I mean to say is we're going to modulo it by an amount. So if we want it to be a strict toggle on and off, we'll just modulo that by 2, right? So modulo 2 would be the case. So every time we press it, it will go, btrig will add 1, and then if it's 1, it'll be 1. If it's 0 or 2, it'll be 0. 3 will be 1. So it'll oscillate between 0 and 1, right? Btrig. So it'll be on or off. But it only changes state every time we push it. Now, here, instead of 2, I propose that we do B mode plus 1 so that we can have a variable toggle that gives it a little bit more functionality. So if B mode is 1, then it's modulo 2, so it's between two different states, 0 and 1. If B mode is 2, that's an argument we pass in, right? Then it'll switch between 3 states, 0, 1, and 0, 1, and 2, 0, 1, and 2, etc., etc. Okay? Now, right. So we've up here in this line, we update btrigger, and then now we have to either send or not send this message based on what the btrigger is. Okay, so in this case, actually, this is not going to help us very much. Actually, to tell you the truth, it's going to toggle. I suppose we can do a switch actually, and we can put different cases in here, but then we'll have to do we'll have to change our class case by case here. So maybe the B mode isn't helping us very much. So rather than confuse things, let me just simply put 2 there. All right. So just so you know, that's an option actually. You could toggle it between many more things, but then you'll have to switch more than you have to give something to do for every instance, and that's not easy to make variable. Okay. So we'll make that 2. So we'll just make it a strict toggle. Okay. And then we'll use an if statement to see whether the btrig is a 0 or a 1. So we'll say if btrig I, and this is after it's been updated, right? So this is on press, equals 0, equals 1. Sorry, this is what happens when btrig is 1, right? We send, if we hit it and it turned to 1, we send, and we don't have to change this here. So we'll just leave that, delete that. So if btrig is 1, then we'll go ahead and send the message, and it'll be, OSC address length, send all these things. Okay. Else, if it's 0, we don't do anything. It just turns it off, right? Okay. And remember, all this is happening within depending on what mode it is. So else being if it's not B mode 0, but it's B mode 1. Okay. All right. Hopefully that was clear enough. So basically the first thing we do, and again, we've done this before, first thing we do, if it's B mode 1, when we push the button, if our mouse is on the button, then for the first thing we're going to do is update the trigger. So if it was 0 before, it becomes 1. If it was 1 before, it becomes 0, so a toggle. Now if it happens to change update into 1, the trigger, then we'll send the message. If it's not, if it's 0, then we won't send a message. We won't do any of this. Okay, and then we just, since we're updating btrigger here, we don't have to update it down here. Okay. Now, we need to copy this syntax here for the other buttons. So I'm going to go here, and I'm just step through it, and it'll be good, even though a little bit redundant here. Give us a chance to understand what happened again. Okay, so on mouse release, it'll be slightly different. What we're going to do is, after the B on, we're going to put that if B mode 0. And this is all the stuff that happens if B mode is 0, right? So if I control T and line it up, this is what happens normally if it's B mode is 0, right? That's that momentary which we had going on before. Else, if it's not 0, then we'll pop in, we'll send the message, then we'll do the whole B trigger thing. So I'm going to copy that as well. So we're going to update the trigger. No, I'm sorry. Okay, so this is on release, right? Okay, so that is slightly different. So if B mode is 0, we're going to do that and then change the trigger to 0, right? If it's not 0, I mean, if it's the B mode is the toggle mode, we're just not going to do anything. So we don't have an else either. We only want it to act on mouse press. We don't want to act on mouse release and toggle. On the momentary mode, we want a message when our mouse is pressed and when it's released. So, for example, we can turn an effect on when we press the mouse, and we turn effect on when we release the button. Press the button, we turn it on, release the button. So it's momentary, right? If it's toggle, you want to press it and then have it be on, and then press it again and have it turn off, right? So, in fact, on release, we don't do anything on the toggle mode. So we just want to make sure that that only gets sent when we're on the momentary mode, okay, the release message. And then same here, then we do have to copy this bits. So I'll just copy this if B mode equals 0. But we'll do that for key pressed. Okay. Oh, and then one thing I didn't do for key pressed. Well, let's take care of this toggle and then I'll correct the mistake there. Okay, so B mode equals 0. And we're going to do all that. So we just have to put another curly bracket in there. So that's what happens when all this is just like it was before. B mode happens 0. And then we're going to do an else, because this is when the key is pressed. And we'll go up and copy the thing from mouse pressed, which is this btrig thing. We're going to update the btrig, toggle through it. Right after the else. So we're going to, every time we key press, exactly the same as the mouse. We're going to do all this, and then we'll copy that. Actually, it's probably exactly the same. So I wonder if we copied all this. I haven't looked at it carefully. Oh yeah, and then we'll have to update it anyways, because I didn't do that before. Okay, so we'll copy all that, else, btrig, if, and all this. And this will be after that. Okay, so if it is mode 1, update the trigger, and then if it's a trigger, then we'll send the message. Okay. And on release, we don't do anything, except we do have to put in if B mode is 0, so that it does not send anything on mode 1. And then make sure we have that close curly bracket. Okay. So B mode is 0 does that, but it does nothing on B mode 1. All right. Now the thing I realized that we need to fix in the keys, and I'm going to try to remember how to do this right, is with the keys, we're actually sorting through not the buttons, the number of buttons, but we're sorting through all the keys, right? And so if we add the I, we're actually adding the I of the keys, not the I of the button. All right. So how do we add the I of the button? To create another indexing just for this key pressed. Okay. So what we'll do is we will so let's think about the different scenarios here. If there are more keys than there are buttons, right? If you have 4 buttons, say, and like 7 keys, only the first 4 keys will work, and the other ones won't go anywhere, right? Because if you just say I equals, and the way we have it for the draw is we have it. Sorry, no, we don't have the draw work. anyways, like for example, the labels. If we have less, we just have the labels repeat, right? So basically, the keys will repeat as well, and we already have it modulo number of buttons. So if we have more keys, and let's say we're using 1 through 9, let's say we only have 3 buttons, then buttons 1, 2, 3 will control the 3 buttons. So will 4, 5, and 6. So will 7, 8, and 9, etc., right? We'll just repeat the keys. We'll play the same buttons, okay? But if we have more buttons than we have keys, then we have to just modulo it here. So we're going to add p-trig number of buttons. We're going to add I, which is the number of keys, plus button number of offsets. So that should be okay, actually, I think. I have to make sure so we send the same messages on mouse press as we key press. We're going to modulo that by num buttons. Okay. And then we'll put that in parentheses. So I modulo number of buttons plus the button number offset, right? So that the same message comes from the keys as it does from the mouse press of the buttons. Okay. We want to make sure we do b-trig number of buttons, right? And then here we have to make sure this gets update. I number of buttons. Okay. So I modulo number of buttons. I modulo number of buttons. If I modulo number of buttons equals 1, and I think that's it. Okay, well, let's see if it works. All right, we didn't update our things. So we just have to add our mode, right? If it's toggle or not. So let's make them both toggle. We'll just make one momentary, one toggle. Something like that. Okay. And then when we run that, let's just see what messages get printed out. Let's see if it's consistent. Okay, so if we have this, these are toggles. So if we press it, it sends out amplify hi-hat on, and then amplify. If you untoggle it, it doesn't send anything. Which should send an off. Okay, so that's one thing we have to update. So actually, it should send the off on the release. So mouse pressed. Okay, so here we have, this is the else. If the mode is 1, that means it's a toggle. So if b-trig is 1, it sends, and then if b-trig is 0, it's the release, right? So we do need to actually copy all this. And the only difference being, and we can make that else. And we just have to make this difference being that's a 0. Okay, so I'll copy all this, the else. Well, maybe I better do it this way, because there might have been some things changed here. Right, so we'll copy this here, this if, and this is in key pressed. We'll copy, that's if it's 1, we'll copy that. And really we're saying else, so if it's 0, and we're just going to change this message here to 0. Okay, so hopefully that holds up. Oops, I forgot to put in something else. Maybe I forgot to put the curly bracket in. Is that possible? Okay, if you look at our super collider, let's just get a new. Okay, so we press it. It's amplify 1, and then 0, amplify, bank 0. And button number 0, the label, and then its state. So that seems to work okay in this one. And these, of course, are still momentary. So I'm doing that, and I shut off the. I shut off the label send because there's no labels. Okay, that seems to work pretty good. Now let's see if our buttons correspond the same. Do I have buttons corresponding to that? Okay, let's make this. Oops. Oh, that was multi Z. Huh. Okay, let's add some. Let's add some. Oh, there is one QAZ to them. Oh, they're the same button, so that's a problem. But I guess that just manually you have to just note that when you instantiate these, if you give them the same buttons, they're gonna be controlled by the same buttons, right? So these ones with the things and everything, let's give a different set of buttons. Let's go 2 on. So we go 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 0. Oops, 0. Run that. And then this is going from 2. That clicks on. Oops. That's off, on, off. 3 on, off, on, off. 4 on, off, on, off. 5 on, off, on, off. 6 on, off, on, off. 7 on, off, on, off. 8 on, off, on, off. 9 comes back to 1. So that works out perfectly. Okay. There you go. So your buttons work and everything works. All right, great. Okay, well, thank you for slogging through that with me. So basically, we have a really well-functioning GUI. Not only do we have a well-functioning GUI, but we are sending some fairly robust messages, states. It tells us what bank it belongs to. It tells us we can choose what OSC address is assigned to each button. We can have an offset, and we can send which button number, but with an offset. We can send the label, and we're sending its state, whether it's on, 1, or 0. And also we made it so that we can have a toggle or not a toggle. Okay, so that seems like an awful long list of arguments, and it kind of is, but at the same time, you just instantiate these things once, and you organize your GUI with those arguments, and then you have it good to go, however you need it. Okay, so I'll end this video here, and good luck, and hope that goes well.